What you're looking at is what we call a Phase 1 version of VK7RTV, its basic format, and this is the main box, shall we say, that's mounted on the receiver antenna, remote from the basic equipment. Houses the UHF converter. It is fed by 9 volts from the main control unit, and IF comes out around about channel 5 on VHF, because that's the antenna input from the antennas. This runs approximately 50 to 60 metres across to the transmitting tower and the main equipment cabinet, which for explanation purposes we've just sat alongside the converter box. Here we have the receiver unit. Housed in here is a standard VHF converter, as I mentioned earlier, set on channel 5. Just another small sound monitor for monitoring purposes. 12 volts fed in from the control unit to power up the receiver. The sound output from the receiver, along with 2 video outputs, one for monitoring purposes and the other one going away to the control unit, which is at this particular panel here. We come along to the left hand end. Because of the emphasis on power consumption, running solar power, we need to conserve every little bit of battery that we have, so we switch off the display to the LEDs when not required, when not in attendance. A manual repeat to manually put the repeater in manual control, manual video ident, sound ident. As the name suggests, to cancelling the timeout of the repeater as required, a test signal which isn't yet installed, and a spare switch position. You'll note that all the switches as shown here are in the down position, which is the repeat mode. The other main compartment is the transmitter compartment. On the left we have a video gain control, sound level control, just an average RF indicator for power, control for manually switching the repeater on as required, or the transmitter I should say, and you can switch the inter-carrier sound on or off. At this stage we'll go around to the rear of the unit and have a look at some of the connections on the back. Right, you're looking at the rear of the main repeater unit. The bottom panel, you might recall, from the front was the receiver panel, and here are the 2 sockets that take the 2 cables which went to the UHF box, which is remote on the receive pole. There is the 9 volts. We'll move some of the rat's nest of cables out of the way. The 9 volts going up, regulated up to the converter, the IF coming back down from the converter at channel 5 VHF. There we go up to the control unit, and we have the video in from the receiver, sound in, and then sound out, video out, and of course the identification, sound and video, is applied from inside the control unit along with other control functions. And a socket here for remote control as required. Then on up to coming out of the control unit up to the main transmitter, sound in, mod in, video in, sorry, and a modulation monitoring point. Across to the left of the unit, the heat sinking for the transmitter, RF output at the bottom, and a demodulated output from a small demodulator for monitoring the video at RF, and into the interdigital filter, which you can just see the edge of sitting on top of the transmitter box. Perhaps we have a look inside each of the compartments. Right, here's the remote UHF converter inside its box. You'll note that it's fairly well insulated. This is the UHF converter in the die-cast box, and in a physical environment it is wrapped again in foam and so forth, to both for vibration on the pole and some further insulation from extreme temperature changes, which of course you get on the mountain. So that's all that's inside that rather large box. From there, back over to the receiver, which you saw before. We have a look inside the animal. On the left, you'll note the VHF converter, a small audio monitoring amplifier and speaker on the hard on the left, the main receiver along the back, and towards the front right hand side is some video amplifier stages and some sound muting stages for the sound channel. Fairly basic sort of a receiver, ex-commercial, likewise with the tuner. Seems to do the job okay. Right, I think we'll have another look at the insides of the control unit. The main heart of the repeater, of course, is the control unit, and quite a few switches and things on the front. As mentioned before, perhaps the unique part of the repeater is a little system we call a random access, or not random access, it's a controlled time access. The repeater in its normal state sitting idle draws around about 6 milliamps, just a single little timer. Approximately every 3 1/4 minutes it switches on the main receiver and the converters, and stays in that mode for around about 5 seconds. Any incoming signal that has horizontal sync on it will be detected by a sync decoder, and of course this from there on in fires up the main repeater. The idea of this is to conserve battery consumption during the idle periods of the repeater, rather than have the receiver running all the time. So that's you can manually bring the repeater on by bringing the switch up. Manual control of the video, sound idents, the timeout, and a test signal which we haven't yet installed, and another spare switch position. Now, just inside the unit, typically still in its prototype, you probably can't quite see down underneath is the video ident board. Then on top we have the sound board. Over to the right is the main board with the sync decoder and various timing circuits for timeout and all the other functions. As mentioned, still in its prototype version. You'll even notice a couple of temporary wires here. So that's the basic control unit in what we call in its phase 1. Righto, this is the main transmitter. On top of the transmitter is the interdigital filter. We can just take the lid off. Tilt the transmitter up for you to have a little look inside. On the, you'll see a relay here. This is the main transmit control relay. Everybody goes aghast at the use of a relay, but we found that that's probably a reliable means of actuating the main transmitter. It's either on or it's off. The sound modulator stage, I might infer that this is all to the design of Ian Davis through ATY at this point in time, the whole transmitter. The RF board, the rear there, and the exciter board here. The repeater running presently as on a downlink of 426.25, and as before, turn the whole unit upside down perhaps. You can see the heat sinking on the back of the unit. That's basically the transmitter within itself, and perhaps now we can have a look at the thing in its equipment cabinet on site on the mountain.